right now. So I want to thank you for coming, and I would just like to turn it over to Mayor Roque for any remarks you'd like to make, and then turn it to Tanya for you to take it from there, Tanya.
Wonderful.
Well, thank you, Ron. I just want to say how much I appreciate our people coming in to help us give all the information we can get, that we can make it available to people so that they can hopefully make some good decisions about getting this vaccine. So thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Tanya, you've got the floor.
Thank you everyone for joining. We've been vaccinating in Sandoval County now for almost a month. Several groups of people are going to be getting their second vaccine tomorrow and Wednesday. I've got a whole bunch of people that got their second vaccine on Friday, and we're hoping to start vaccinating even more and more people, because vaccines don't stop pandemics, but vaccinations do stop pandemics, such as smallpox and polio. So I'm really thankful that Dr. Braude, who has a lot of good information and very knowledgeable, is willing to come out and give us more information and answer questions. Dr. Braude, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And what I did, I mean, I think this is a great opportunity to have a discussion, question answer. I always learn from these discussions as well. The format wise, informal, I did make a bit of a PowerPoint to address what have been some of the really common questions and concerns that I personally had and that I'm hearing from other people. And my plan was to run through those, but I absolutely can stop at any point. And if people would, rather have discussion, that's great. I tried to keep it's mostly pictures, diagrams, figures, just to kind of explain some background. So I will, and if there's questions in the chat, Tanya, I'm going to leave that up to you to interrupt me if there's anything I should stop for.
Awesome. I'll make sure I have that open.
All right. So just a couple background items, just in terms of terminology, that, COVID-19 is one of many coronavirus infections. SARS, people may remember all the discussion about SARS. That was also a coronavirus. So that was CoV-1, and now CoV-2 is the more official scientific name for the virus that's causing the COVID 2019 infection. There's coronaviruses. They've been around for forever, and we have been we've all had coronaviruses. Everybody on this call has had a coronavirus upper respiratory infection at some point in time. Viruses change, viruses mutate. Obviously, that's been in the news a lot. And sometimes they turn into something like what we have, unfortunately, right now. So in terms of just a few things, very few of my slides have words like this on them. This is one of the last ones, but sort of some thoughts on why to get the vaccine. And some of this is my opinion, some of this might be CDC opinion. But first of all, it's to prevent yourself from getting sick. It's uncomfortable. And I'll show you some slides, hopefully to convince some of you that this is way worse than the flu. I'm not much of a germaphobe. I don't worry about getting the flu very much. I get my flu vaccine every year. I know it's not that effective and I may still get the flu, and I don't worry about it when I go to work. I worried about this one. It's lost work for you, lost work and school for family if people are quarantined, and quarantining for uninfected family members is really complicated and begins once you recover. So that can be, I have some firefighters in other departments who have family members that are out from school for many weeks as a result. So it's certainly an inconvenience. Of course, we want to prevent our friends and family from getting sick. We want to prevent the public we interact with from getting sick. The new variants that haven't really made their way that we know of here to New Mexico, that in the last that I heard, maybe there's even the newer data, but they'll get here. And unfortunately, those are associated with being much more infectious, and some of our simple measures and masks are probably not going to be as effective. And if we want to open up, this is part of what we're going to have to do, of course, to open up. Speaking of opening up, I have to let a cat out of the room who's going to start whining. There we go. All right. So one thing I just wanted to talk about for a second is why you really don't want to get COVID if you can avoid it, and why this is really worse than the flu. And I hear this from some folks frequently. So first of all, just, we don't have to look at all these numbers, but if you just look at a few things on here, like down about halfway where it says hospitalization rate, the seasonal flu, 2%, depending on the population you look at and when in the pandemic you looked at it. There have been certain periods of time in certain populations where hospitalization rates are about 20%, which is crazy. And so there's also different degrees of infectivity and other things, but that's the one thing that I would certainly draw some attention to. And also, if you compare, it's kind of interesting. So this puts COVID-19 right in the middle of this graph. There's things like Ebola, and arguably way worse. But it's also, if you look at where flu is on the list, it's, COVID is way worse than the flu. Ebola is way worse than COVID-19. And if as a cause of death, this was early, this was back in May, COVID-19 had already moved up to be the third most common cause of death in the United States. We worry about traffic accidents, and we worry about all sorts of things. This is way in another league. And the prediction is that by the time this peaks, that we will be way beyond cancer and heart disease as a cause of death. This was in Europe, but I mean, the numbers are very similar for the US. So all these other things that we see every day and we worry about kind of pale in comparison to what COVID's capable of. And again, these may be numbers that people have seen, but we're now at 373,000 deaths in the US from COVID-19. That's more than all the other world conflicts besides World War II combined. And it's approaching and will soon surpass the deaths from World War II. Now, granted, some of that I understand is different age groups, but still very, very significant. And I put this up also, again, not to get lost in all these numbers, I'm just going to highlight a couple things for you. You can see that on the left side, we have age groups. And I think there's a lot of focus. I deal with a lot of young, healthy folks and kind of asking, well, why should I get the vaccine? I'm not going to have a serious repercussion from this. Well, that's probably true. Your friends, your family, people you interact with in a public capacity or personally absolutely may have a bad outcome. But it is, there are absolutely deaths involving COVID at all age groups, even in pediatrics. It may be a small number, but there are absolutely deaths. And if you compare that to deaths involving influenza, these numbers are way higher as as we look down on this graph, way, way higher. So any age group, we are seeing some of these. Some people may have read about the inflammatory disorder, multi-system inflammatory disorder in children. We have had quite a few cases at UNM already identified, pediatric patients, and these are patients who go on to get aneurysms of the blood vessels in their heart, which is not an insignificant thing. So even in a state like New Mexico without a huge population, the last time I checked, we had over a dozen cases just at UNM of that. So it is a legitimate concern for all age groups. Clearly, the older you get, way higher risk, unfortunately. The other thing that might be worth mentioning is this concept of the long hauler. There's more and more evidence, and unfortunately, we're seeing this in the hospitalized patients, and I've also seen this in one of my colleagues at work, but there are really persistent symptoms from COVID-19. And this was looking at patients 2 months after their first symptoms. And in red are how many people are complaining of these ongoing symptoms. So a lot of people are still tired and short of breath and having joint and chest pains 2 months after their first diagnosis. So it can really, in some people, and we still don't understand exactly yet why certain people are prone to this can hang on for a long time. And it seems like some people have just never recovered. Now, this virus hasn't been around for years yet, but it can be very long. And we don't see this in a lot of our other viruses like the flu. And if you what we know about other coronaviruses like SARS, this is also true. These can really last. This was one with the first SARS virus, clearly a more serious virus, but it's also a coronavirus. 40% of people still had symptoms 3.5 years after. And you don't have to be one of the really sick people to have persistent symptoms. You could be a relatively healthy young person and have your symptoms persist. So this is legit. This is kind of a something you want to avoid. This recent statistic from the World Health Organization showing most people have mild or moderate, thank goodness. 10 to 15% of people have severe disease. 5% become critically ill. Way, way bigger numbers than we see with the flu. Most people will recover in 2 to 6 weeks, but some, like I said, it can hang around. The other thing that's kind of scary, there's a lot of things scary about COVID-19, is that its effect on the brain. And there's more and more evidence of this causing long-term brain issues. And a lot of it we just haven't recognized yet. It hasn't been around long enough. Everybody is so focused on short-term, just people that are in the hospital, critically ill. And now there's people that are starting to see that this is associated with bipolar disorder, psychosis, epilepsy, seizures. So it's affecting multiple organ systems, not just the lungs like people may think of. And I think some of you may have seen some of the news about the effects on the heart. And this is just, one of the high profile athletes that had, collapsed. Probably should have somebody mute everybody if you have the technology. Let's see. All right. So affects the heart too. So it's really, it's something to be avoided. So I thought just to review, I would review really quickly just kind of how normal infection and immunity happens. And then we'll just talk about the vaccine, which is, I imagine, what we're really here to do. So this is a diagram of what the virus looks like. And this is an enhanced electron microscope image of what a real virus looks like. And you can see this virus, the reason they call it a coronavirus, and the crown, is the kind of the crown or the sun effect of all these, what they call spike proteins that sit on the outside of this 3-dimensional virus. And then all the material that's inside it that's able to replicate and, cause all the problems. The way this normally works, just really fast and simple, you inhale the virus and it gets into the mucosa, and then it gets into, comes up to a cell. And if the cell has the right receptor on it, it basically locks on to that receptor on the surface of the cell, and it makes its way into a cell. So this is now looking inside a cell. The virus is inside the cell, and the virus basically gives instructions to make proteins and to replicate the virus, and it just the cycle keeps continuing. And eventually you will develop an immune response, you'll develop antibodies, and then these antibodies will then attack viruses that are in your body. And hopefully that's what sort of helps end the infection and provide some degree of protection from another infection. How long that lasts seems to be variable. We don't know. Some people that are donating plasma after being infected get their antibody levels checked every time they go in to donate. And they're often very disappointed that after a few weeks, they're told they just don't have enough antibodies left anymore to even donate. Doesn't necessarily mean they're not protected, but at some point, we know with normal coronaviruses that cause the cold, you can get those every year. So it's not having had the infection doesn't eliminate the risk, which is why people that have had the infection, at least in general, are recommended to get a vaccine as well, because the vaccine seems to induce a longer, stronger immune response consistently without measuring everybody's antibody levels to see if you may already have had COVID, you may already have enough antibodies that it's not going to help you, but it doesn't seem to hurt you. And then let's just get to the meat of this. How does this vaccine in this case actually work? So as everybody probably knows, the two vaccines that are available, approved in the US right now for emergency use, are these mRNA, messenger RNA viruses. RNA is not DNA. Your DNA normally tells, basically your DNA instructs the development of RNA, which then tells your body how to make proteins, kind of the building block of everything. So it's not RNA, going into DNA. It's normally DNA then leads to RNA, leads to a protein. So we're basically just putting RNA in, which then can lead to the proteins that we want to have made. And in this case, we're making spike proteins without the whole virus. So by making spike proteins, your body then develops antibodies to those. So when you are exposed to a coronavirus, you have antibodies already ready and primed to attack any cell that comes along with spike proteins on it. So that's pretty cool. That's how these mRNA virus vaccines work. One thing it's worth noting, RNA only has a half-life of a lifetime of about 2 minutes. So RNA is not something that, you're injected with RNA and these things, survive, you're forever going to be walking around with this RNA. That's not how RNA works. Each particular molecule is pretty short-lived. The safety of this, which is, I think, everybody's question and concern, right? Is this safe? I think the biggest thing that I asked myself, and I hear appropriately from people, is, wait a second, this happened really fast. How could this be safe? How could we know this is safe when we put something together this fast? Well, it's true, this was way faster. But if you look at what's normally involved in developing a vaccine, there's years of preclinical work, which we just shortened. With the actual clinical development of the vaccine, we did things, instead of normally and we'll talk about this in a second, you do a phase 1 study and it takes you months to get approval for the phase 1 study. Then you do the phase 1 study, and then you have to analyze the data, and you analyze that very quickly, but then it takes months or years to get approval to do phase 2. Then you do phase 2, and then it takes years to get approval to do phase 3. All of those phases were basically streamlined. There was all of the normal bureaucracy was essentially eliminated. And we know how much bureaucracy we normally have, especially with the FDA. So if you look at this kind of shows how things were just sort of done in parallel instead of normally done in series. There were some things that we could sort of skip, some things we could combine. We started the manufacturing process while we were already doing the clinical trials. We started production before the clinical trials were done, just on the assumption that it would get approved. They were already fixed. So all of this is the efficiency that made it possible to do this faster. But the actual study of subjects was actually way better than it is on most vaccine studies. We actually, the Pfizer vaccine was studied in almost 44,000 people and the Moderna in 30,000. And just so you know, a normal vaccine, a phase 3 trial is like 1,000 to 3,000 patients. So this has actually been way more studied than most of the drugs that, if you're taking a prescription drug right now, just know that it wasn't studied before it was released in nearly this many patients. Now, once it goes out into general use, then they do what's called phase 4, which is they just follow up and they monitor safety and stuff. But this is actually way, way better than what we see in most drugs and vaccines. So that part wasn't shortchanged. The other thing that's interesting is we started 43 vaccines in phase 1. So far, only 20 were allowed to go to phase 2 and 3, and only 3 have been approved. So it's not like just anybody who shows up with a vaccine was just like, okay, we want a vaccine. It's actually been very, very selective in terms of getting, and that's 3 internationally. That's not 3 in the US. We have 2 in the US, probably 3 soon, but 3 internationally have been approved. So in the US, went from 43 candidates, and we're just so far have 2 that have met the rigorous standard for approval. Some things you just wrap up here with things to just reassure you: the vaccine does not give you COVID. All this mRNA can instruct the body to do is make spike proteins.
Mom!
What was that? So it can't give you COVID, and it can't make you infectious, contagious to anybody else. And messenger RNA can't get into your DNA. So, and in fact, it doesn't hang around very long at all. Now, it can make you feel cruddy. I was pretty lucky. My second shot, I didn't feel really bad at all, but I've definitely had some colleagues that felt pretty cruddy for a day or two, and a bunch of people that have had to call off work for a day or two, all of whom thought, well worth it. But that is something, but that's just an inflammatory response. That's not you getting COVID. But what the vaccine does, causes pain at the injection site, can cause inflammation. It can cause allergic reactions. Seems to be a little higher than with other vaccines, but there have been no deaths from allergic reactions reported. And again, some more of these symptoms with the second dose. But that's really the quick down and dirty on the vaccine. I'm sort of, on the virus, at least in my opinion, humble opinion, why you don't want to get it, and why we, should consider this vaccine that seems to me to be very safe. And I was absolutely clawing my way to the front of the line to try to get it. And I'm certainly feel better knowing that I've had it. So at this point, Tanya, I don't know if any questions came up in the chat, or if you thought of any questions, or anybody else.
Nothing came up in the chat. But would you say that having a reaction to a vaccine where you feel kind of cruddy, doesn't mean if you don't have a reaction, your immune system isn't working, but isn't that part of your immune system where it's doing something, it's recognizing the second dose?
Yes, to be honest with you, I feel a little shortchanged that I didn't get a stronger reaction on the second dose. Because part of me is like, well, wait a second, I kind of wanted to have more of a reaction to kind of know that the immune system is revving up. So at least I had a painful arm, so I knew that I had something. But yeah, it's not a bad sign that you have a reaction. We don't know yet if that means you have more or longer immunity, but you shouldn't. You should just know you're probably going to want to take some Tylenol and plan to get the vaccine on a day when, if you need to, lay low for 24 hours and get some rest, that you're able to do that.
Dr. Braude, I have a question. It's okay then, like to take Tylenol or an ibuprofen before you get the vaccine?
Yes, some people are, there's some questions, and there's always been lingering weird questions about ibuprofen and all this, but I'd say the majority of the evidence is yes, it's absolutely fine to pre-treat yourself, or you can just kind of wait and see if you need it. It responds very quickly if you wait until you have symptoms and take it. And nobody has said it was, in any way unbearable. It's just like, yeah, this kind of some people had a little bit of fever, some chills, muscle aches, and they were really tired. And most people said they took a little Tylenol or ibuprofen and went to bed, and they woke up and they felt fine.
Thank you.
We have one question on the chat. Mike wanted to know if I could see what he wrote, and I can, Mike. The second one is, kids, have any kids received it yet? And different reactions for vaccines in kids. And I do know that we're only allowing under 16 and up for Pfizer, but we are in clinical trials. If you have any more information on that.
No, in this particular vaccine, they only studied it initially in adults, or 16 and over, and the plan was to just, since that was the age group being most affected, let's put the attention there, and then they would go back and do additional safety studies in younger age groups. So at this point, no kids are going to get it outside of a study, so don't even have to worry about the issues. And then we'll find out if it's as safe, as effective, more safe, more effective in kids. We just don't know yet.
So my next question is, as I read Mike's wrong, Mike wanted to know if there's a way to find out if the vaccine actually worked on you. Are they doing any, I know they've done follow-ups in their test cases, phase 3 trials, but are they doing anything other than you don't get COVID or you get mild COVID?
Yeah, I'm not aware of any generally available yet titers like we do for some other vaccinations, where you get a titer drawn to see if the vaccination took, so to speak. Again, this is all so new that there hasn't been a focus on that outside of research settings, absolutely in research settings, but I don't think it's otherwise available to anybody else.
One of the interesting facts that I would like to add is, I was reading in Nature this morning, I believe, I don't know when the article came out, but I was reading it this morning, that 59% of all COVID infections, they believe, can be linked back to an asymptomatic spreader. A person who had either no symptoms or symptoms so mild they didn't recognize them as COVID, maybe just tiredness, that has spread it to large groups of people.
And Tanya, that's a great point. That also actually reminds me that there is also one of the rumors out there is that if you get the vaccine, you can be a carrier for COVID. And that's not true. I think the confusion is that the vaccine is, we think from the initial studies, obviously we'll know even more once more people get it, if you get the 2 doses, 90 to 95% protective from getting a COVID infection. There's a small chance of getting a very mild infection, which could be asymptomatic. And so for those few days, if that were to happen, for those few days where you could be contagious and be asymptomatic, which is, way less of a risk than if you don't have the vaccine. But I mean, it's not that you have this persistent carrier state out there. There is a small chance that you could get the infection, and there could be a few days where you were contagious, which is why, we're still recommending people that are vaccinated to still use, reasonable precautions. I mean, just because I'm vaccinated, I live with people who are not. And so it's not like I'm going to work and just completely throwing away all my protection because of that. I'm not worried about being a carrier. I just realized there's a small chance that I could have an asymptomatic infection at some point in time. Now, once everybody in the community is vaccinated, that changes the calculation entirely. But clearly we're not anywhere near that yet.
Dr. Brody,
Yes.
what about, what are the numbers that they're going to be looking for on the vaccination of people to some sense of normalcy, like getting back to the gym, getting back to some normal life with some restrictions, like, still wearing an N95 to the gym or to the store or to just regular out and about stuff?
I think that is the $1 million question right now. Because there's a couple parts of that. There's the, what number sort of starts approximating herd immunity that we hear about. But there's also, how does it affect? So there's what affects the individual who's been vaccinated and your ability to return on this, what's called an immunity passport, back to normal activities. Somebody just sent me something, for example, that if you want to go to Hawaii, they've been very strict about quarantining people and testing before you fly to Hawaii. But later this month, anybody who has proof of vaccination can come to Hawaii with no further testing. So as an example, that's the one of that's going to start happening, where proof of immunity is going to generate this immunity passport, and you're going to be able to have certain activities and things open to you that aren't open to people that haven't been vaccinated. But we don't have anything from the CDC or the World Health Organization yet that's giving guidance to the states. At the university, we're having tons of discussions right now. For example, since most of our healthcare personnel are choosing to get vaccinated, can we start having in-person conferences again and meetings with everybody socially distanced with a mask? But, and the answer is probably, but nobody has given us that specific what date and what percentage of the people. I'm hoping that my sense is that everybody has appropriately just been focused on getting everybody their vaccines. And that now, as we start getting more people vaccinated, the people in these positions in public health are going to have a little more time to scratch their head and do the math and give us some additional guidance in the next few weeks. So it's not really an answer, Donald. Sorry.
That's good. Thank you.
And I don't know if anybody else, Tanya, you're in a lot of the state calls, and I'm sure administrators are as well. If anybody has heard other specific guidance on what vaccination will mean for opening up, and please jump in.
I've heard that, I was talking and had mute, sorry. I had heard, it goes between 60 and 70 and 80. I think part of it's still going to look at workman's comp issues, because if you've got an office with 30 people and 10 aren't vaccinated, and I get COVID and don't realize it, and I bring it in and they get really sick, I think they're still looking at that. I think they're still looking at numbers and percentages for vaccine before we get any further. The more we get vaccinated, though, the less positivity rate, the less infection, the less hospitals. So that will start moving us to open up, because it will start changing our numbers. We know that. Question from chat. I received my Tdap vaccine and had to wait for my first dose of the Pfizer. Have there been any, or should there be any concerns with other vaccines being taken around the same time as the Pfizer? He did wait his 14 days. And if you don't know the answer, I was actually in a vaccine meeting on this one, Darren. I can't answer it.
Go for it.
Okay, so we were waiting 14 days in between vaccinations on people. Think about when you take your kid to their well childs, they jam them with all these vaccines at one time. We were waiting the 14 days in the beginning because the FDA and the drug companies were really wanting to weed out, is your reaction from MMR? Because MMR has 1 in 27 get some one out of 27,000 can get thromboleukopenia from it. So they were really trying to make you wait those 14 so we could be able to say, was that reaction a vaccine reaction for Pfizer or Moderna, or was that reaction from the Tdap? We no longer have that 14-day question. It went out of our screening guidelines as of last Wednesday, because they had gotten enough data that they were satisfied that they weren't having, they'd gotten enough people vaccinated to see the reactions they were having from Pfizer and Moderna. Did that answer the question for the person in the chat? I have another person who wants to know, I have O positive or O negative blood. Will I still be able to donate blood when I'm called if I'm vaccinated? I know they're calling people who have had COVID to please donate. So I don't think the vaccine's going to change that.
Yeah, if anything, you're you're maybe more desirable.
And another question, how do we acquire proof of immunity? Right now, it's just our vaccination card. Like Dr. Braude said, we don't have a titer yet to see how long it lasts. I know the Moderna right now is looking at, they think it's going to be 2 years based on their modeling.
Can I go off of that a little bit, Commander? Can I ask you something more on that?
Yes, go ahead, Jordan.
So, and then also Doc as well. So you had stated that the when you get the virus, you develop the antibodies to it, and that it's kind of unknown how long those antibodies kind of stay in your body, but you do know that it has been fluctuating as far as some people go in a few weeks later to donate plasma and that they no longer have the required antibodies amount just to fight off that vaccine, or they don't have enough antibodies. With the vaccine, you're essentially telling your body to create these antibodies so that it can effectively fight off the virus. So how long do those antibodies last, or do we not know? Do we not have enough information for that right now?
Darren, do you want to start?
Well, I think that gets exactly to what, it's a great question, what Tanya was talking about. Well, for one thing, we don't know because we haven't had this vaccine for very long. We've had it long enough. I mean, if you look back at the first people that had this in the very first studies, we're now going back many months. So in terms of a safety perspective, we've had people that have now had the vaccine on board for months. But in terms of how long the antibodies are going to last, it's like Tanya said, they're modeling this out and they're trying to figure out their best guess. And I think this may well be something where you have to get a booster every year. It's kind of like a flu shot. We have to get a flu shot every year. If that's the worst case, that would be okay. I hope that's not the case. I hope it turns out that it lasts longer. But all I've heard so far are guesses and theories. But we just don't know.
Jordan, so you know what they're doing, and everyone, what they're doing is anyone that enrolled in the clinical trial, they're following for a minimum of 24 months. And these people have to go in and answer questions. They have to say what they're doing, whether they got sick, they're getting blood work, they're taking their blood samples. So they can test to see if there's antibodies in their blood samples. It's just not like, if I need to go take a class, I can go get a titer for measles, mumps, and rubella because I don't have a shot record, and they can tell me that I'm still good. Now, I will tell you, I've had to have a booster shot for measles, mumps, and rubella and polio because I was no longer good. So they are taking that and they're using computer modeling and graphics, and they're taking decay of immunity and putting it out. And I have not read the Pfizer one. I'm sorry, I've been very busy with people with COVID and stuff and getting people vaccinated. But I know Moderna was looking at, they really thought that it was right now looking at about a 2-year span. And we do have another question in chat. What does the new COVID strain mean a need for a new vaccine? I don't know if they're talking about the UK strain or the South American strain, but they both seem similar. Doc, you want to go ahead?
Well, I mean, these viruses are going to mutate, guaranteed. Sometimes the mutations are to our advantage. Sometimes the mutations actually make a virus less contagious, less significant. And sometimes the mutations, they're random mutations. Sometimes they make them worse. There's a little bit of a evolutionary advantage to a random mutation that makes the virus more contagious is going to get perpetuated. As you can imagine, something that makes the virus less contagious doesn't perpetuate. So, but there's going to be mutations. There always are. The flu is a classic example. I mean, it mutates every year, guaranteed. So it appears so far that the mutations are not affecting at least the UK strain in terms of the vaccines, how well the vaccine works. I have not heard anything definitive. I wouldn't say it's absolutely definitive on either of these, but it looks good for the UK variant. And I haven't heard anything on the South American variant and the vaccine that I considered reliable yet. Unless you heard anything on your call.
No, and I've been reading up and they haven't done a lot of studies on that one. The one thing I can say is the way viruses mutate is us spreading them. So they mutate because they go to me and then they go to you and they go to Darren and they go to Jordan and they go to Anthony and they go to the mayor, and that's how they mutate. The less virus we have out there because we're not letting it mutate in our bodies, the less likelihood of it mutating. Am I correct?
Say that again.
The less, if we can get the virus under the control, the less likely we're going to have multiple mutations of it, because it needs our cell to mutate. It doesn't just mutate in the air. It's got to be inside something to mutate. It's got to grow and replicate in our bodies.
Yep, it needs the host.
And right now they are looking at, because we're using spike protein, and luckily coronaviruses have spike proteins. I'm personally feeling confident.
Right, now the other thing is the third vaccine, the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine, is not an mRNA vaccine. It's different. And there's other vaccines in the pipeline that are also different. And so I would imagine, within the next, year, we're going to know a lot more about which vaccine works the best and lasts the longest. I mean, we are at the leading edge of this. I mean, but I will tell you, we know more about the coronavirus in this variant in less than a year than we know about the HIV virus, and it's been around a long time. I mean, there is just so much. I mean, we are learning so much every day. I mean, you can't keep up. It's phenomenal. And so a lot of these questions that it's kind of like, how do you not know the answer to that? It's just because it's so new, and we will, in 6 months, we will have so much more information. We just need everybody to get who can get vaccinated so we can get through the next 6 months, basically.
Anyone else have anything to put into the chat question? Anyone who's gotten a vaccine want to tell us about their reactions or lack of reactions? I know that my arm was sore for less than 24 hours on my first vaccine. The more I moved it, and it was not as bad as a tetanus. And I took my mom today to get her vaccine. Where and when can we get signed up for it? I will send out a link to everyone in the village with Aaron's help and supervisor's help for your link, because a lot of people are now in phase 1B are able to get vaccinated. So I will send that out to you. And if you previously signed up, you need to go back into that link and make sure you updated it. When we did some updating and changing, it dropped some addresses and those kind of things, or didn't let you put your health information in. You do need to go back in and update that.
Doc, I got one more question regarding blood donations.
Yep. What do you got?
So I do blood donations for therapeutic reasons per a provider that I have. And I'm coming due. Is there a timeline after getting the second vaccination dose for when I can and can't, or is there a window, or can I, let's say I have to I sign up to donate in 2 days and I get my second vaccination tomorrow. Can I go in 2 days?
I actually have not heard, I have not heard an answer on that. Tanya, I don't know if you've heard an answer on blood donation. I haven't heard any prohibition against it, but I haven't heard a specific timeline. I'm happy to research that for you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not in a hurry to take 2 needles in a week, so, we're good on that end. And then, have they shown anything? Because I noticed one of the callers or one of the people here was asking about, plasma and blood donation. So when you donate, they do an antibody test anyway to see if you have the antibody. Will it show up because of the shot in that testing
Um,
of having the antibodies from the vaccination?
I'm looking.
yeah, I mean, well, because it depends a little bit on which test they're doing. And yeah, it's a good question. I know that's not the side of it that I deal with at all in my world. Happy to research that one too.
So COVID-19 vaccinations and blood donor eligibility. There's no deferral time for eligible blood donors who are vaccinated with the inactivated or RNA-based COVID-19 Moderna or Pfizer. Eligible blood donors who are vaccinated with a replication defective virus vaccine manufactured by AstraZeneca or Johnson & Johnson must wait 2 weeks before giving blood. No wait for Pfizer or Moderna. 2 weeks on the AstraZeneca or Janssen. Eligible blood donors who do not know what type of vaccine they receive must wait 4 weeks before donating blood. That makes no sense, but okay. If you don't know what
That does make no sense.
I guess maybe because they put that out there in case, because I know Mexico's using the China vaccine right now. So maybe that's why. Regardless of the type of vaccine an individual receives, all donors must be symptom-free, feeling well at the time of donation. If the individual is experiencing any symptoms from the vaccine, the Red Cross asks they postpone until they're feeling better. If you have an appointment scheduled and you need to change times, click here. So they are going to make you wait because of the type of vaccine that AstraZeneca or Johnson & Johnson are going to be. But not on Moderna or Pfizer, Donald.
Yeah, I didn't know there were so many people. Donating blood product, which is fantastic.
No, there are, and I this weekend talked to a Corrales family that had COVID and still had COVID right after Thanksgiving. One spent 5 days in the hospital. One is out. They're both kind of long hauling, short of breath, very, very tired, but they fought to make sure they could get in, and they're scheduled for their first donation at the end of January to get that out there.
Yeah, and that's what generates what you hear about the convalescent plasma. The other treatment that is the monoclonal antibodies, where we're actually generating antibodies in the lab. So there's basically 2 ways to get antibodies: either to get them from somebody who's already had the infection, or to generate them in the lab. And so, but it's effective one way or another to get antibodies in people for sure. Or you can have a vaccine and make your own. It's like you're your own lab. Awesome.
Oh, and I need to find chat. When I opened up my screen just to make sure we aren't missing any. Aaron, I don't know if you can see chat.
I don't see any other questions on here.
Okay, I found it. I got back to it.
Well, if anything comes up, as you can, Tanya can probably answer the question, but and she can absolutely reach out to me if we need to put our heads together to answer anything for anybody.
I really appreciate the number of people that actually got on our call, and I appreciate how wonderful the village staff has been during the pandemic. on, you know, even going too deep in quarantine, which is one of the things we've been doing in the fire station. And I know other people have done it. If a spouse has been exposed, they're locking down also to make sure they're not going to be coming to work every day. And all of a sudden have to lock down more people. I think you guys have done really, really well, and everyone deserves a big applaud. I just wanted to see us get through this.
Absolutely. And the worst thing is, and I've seen it a few times now, are people who get all the way down to the wire, like to getting their vaccine scheduled, or a day or two into their vaccine before it's actually started to do anything, and then they get COVID. So we can't let our guard down right here at the 1 yard line.
Well, Dr. Braude, thank you. Mayor, Ron, do either one of you have anything to add? Aaron, anyone?
I just want to say, this is the mayor, and I want to say that I want to echo what both the doctor and Commander Lattin have said. I think the staff, the village has been very remarkable in doing the very best it can to keep yourselves and keep members of the public safe. I do think we can look ahead and see maybe if we can just make it through the next 6 months, it's going to look a lot better. So I'm a vaccination person, and I hope that Dr. Braude was able to, I hope he's able to convince some of you that it's a good thing to do. But in any event, thank you so much for all your efforts. And I hope as information becomes more available, you'll be willing to come back and talk to us some more.
You bet.
And if you're just afraid of the needle, you don't know how many people their only fear has been the needle. I give a very good vaccine, I promise. I hate needles with a passion. And everyone out there where we're giving vaccines, we're really good at doing them, but we've been making sure, because I've had the biggest, burliest man come in and say, God, I hate needles. And he's like, oh, you already gave me the shot?
Yeah, I'll tell you what, I didn't feel either of my vaccines. In the first one, I was really out until my arm started hurting later that night. I was convinced that there had been an error and they hadn't actually given me the vaccine. And I was, because there was this little news story about somebody who had saw on the news getting an empty vial, but it really did not hurt at all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Melissa, that was for the fire department training was logged in for. We have a special training board. So we logged in an hour and a half for people on the fire department. But I can also send out CEs if people, not CEs, but certificates if anyone would like them for a file.